ragazzi. Hopefully you have read the syllabus, you have watched the introduction video. This is the first video for our lectures. If you have not already done so, complete the packet that I sent with this video link. For this course, what you are going to need to do is keep a big document that you are going to send to me at the end with your responses to all of the questions and all of the things I ask you to do in these packets. So, for this video, you do the packet first, then you watch this video. In this video, I just want to talk about two things that I cover briefly in the packet. The first thing I want to talk about is the 5 stages of groups. Hopefully this is a review. You've had this information in some other course somewhere else in your education. But the 5 stages of groups are forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning or adjourning. In other words, teams come together, that's the forming. There's a storming process. This is disagreements. Oftentimes this has to do with us settling into roles. It has to do with us determining what is the norm for our team as far as processes. Then we settle into norming. And norming is the stage where as a team, we're all on the same page as far as here's who we are, here's how we get things done. Here's who plays what roles in our team. That leads us to performing, where we're able to have high performance. And then finally, usually teams disband. Remember, oftentimes we think about differentiating groups and teams. Teams are brought together for an explicit purpose of executing a goal. So once we reach that goal, sometimes teams disband. Oftentimes we just have another goal that replaces that initial goal. One of the things I do want to note, and I will say this over and over and over and over, in general, long-standing teams outperform newly formed teams. There is a reason for this, and there are things that we can do to sort of accelerate it. We can do other things to make them perform better. The 5 stages of group formation, why do we talk about this? Well, I've taught this to be a little bit, I don't know, I've been teaching this for a hot minute. When I first started teaching, I taught the 5 stages because it was in every book and I thought I had to teach it. And it wasn't until I got a little bit further in my career and started working with teams a little bit more that I realized there is a critical stage in here that is not talked about enough. It is not emphasized enough. And that is the storming stage. Oftentimes, managers build team is formed, and they think that they did a really good job in building the team. And maybe they did, but inevitably there's conflict that occurs. We're going to talk about how actually you want some conflict in team. High-performing teams actually have conflict. It's part of their culture. But sometimes managers see this conflict and they say, oh no, this is bad. I've messed up. This team is not going to work. Let's break it down and start again. So I think that what is important about that 5 stages of groups is recognizing that the storming stage is probably going to occur. It is okay. What you as a leader and as a manager and as a good team member needs to do is make sure that conflict is functional, make sure that it leads to something about an understanding about who we are, how we are going to do things, about our processes, because what you want to work towards is that norming stage, because that's really where we get the power of teams, where we can get a lot of synergy, where we know what we're doing as a team, we have a unified idea as far as processes, as far as roles, and we're almost able to anticipate each other's actions. The second main thing I want to cover today is the punctuated equilibrium model. The punctuated equilibrium model, the way I think about it is there's 2 different kinds of models. And I'm borrowing these terms from economics. So hopefully you guys are familiar with these terms. The first model that we talk about is what is known as the descriptive model. The descriptive model describes what is, what often happens when teams are just left on their own. The other model we have is the prescriptive or the normative model. This is what should happen. This is what high-performing teams do. So on the one hand, we have the descriptive model, which most teams actually follow, and then we have the prescriptive model or the normative model, which is this is what high-performing teams do, this is what we would like teams to do. The descriptive model basically notes this, that when teams get a project, They usually start off with a little bit of effort until they hit what is known as the punctuated equilibrium point. And at the punctuated equilibrium point, often halfway until the due date of the project. Then what we see is we see a spike in effort. That is, we come together, we talk initially about how we're going to tackle a project, then based on everything else we have to do, it kind of gets put on the back end until that deadline gets a little bit closer. Then it becomes a little bit more urgent and our effort accelerates very quickly for this project. That is the descriptive model, what normally happens in teams. The normative model or the prescriptive model, what high-performing teams do, what we want teams to do, is their effort curve looks a little bit different. They basically, once they get the project, the amount of effort remains steady throughout the project's lifeline. That is, they work on the project consistently until it is done. However, in the normative model, there still are punctuated equilibrium points. That is, there's a shift from a focus of we're going to focus on planning to punctuated equilibrium point. We're going to shift our effort focus to actually doing, to punctuated equilibrium point where we're going to shift to a little bit more controlling. That is, some quality control. Are we comfortable with the end product? Where are the adjustments we need to make in order to meet the due date? So the idea is that what these high-performing teams do, it's not that they are just working on one project and they don't have other projects to do, but in their mind, they're constantly attuned to this project, realizing that it needs constant effort, that they will produce better products in the end, better outcomes in the end, if they focus on the project for a longer period of time. Lower performing teams, what oftentimes teams do is they think about it for a minute, it gets put on the back shelf, and then as the due date gets closer, it all of a sudden gets some urgency. And what ends up happening is they perform, and sometimes they perform adequately, but the product or whatever they're producing ends up being rushed. The normative model allows us a lot more time for quality control, to make sure we're producing things that we are comfortable with, that we can correct and we can prepare for the inevitable setbacks that occur. So in the packet, I ask you to think about the teams that you have been on, the high-performing teams, the teams that have been maybe not as high-performing, and what were some of the differentiating characteristics. It has been my experience working with student teams that student teams oftentimes fall into that descriptive punctuated equilibrium model. So one of the things I asked you in the packet was, what are things that you could do with this information to make your teams better performing? Well, I'll start with the punctuated equilibrium model. In the normative model, which is what we want, what we know is that teams put in effort throughout equally. So you always want to keep the projects in the back of your mind and make sure that you're continually working on the project. But one of the things I would use with the punctuated equilibrium model is realize that there's a tendency for teams to sort of put off some activities until the due date approaches. So we can combat this by putting some deadlines in the middle, some touch points, some deliverables, and also artificially pushing the deadlines forward. We call these stretch goals. And the idea is it adds a little bit of what we call stress, the motivating stress to people. And also, if we miss those deadlines, oftentimes we're still ahead of the game. That gives us more time to engage in quality control in our product output. I would use the 5 stages of groups information to realize that the storming stage is critically important so that we can get to the norming so that we can have high performance. Remember, storming doesn't have to be a hurricane. It can be a light drizzle. It can be very light rain. So we can engage in this storming process by very quickly asking things, what is your preferred mode of communication? This may lead to some disagreements about I like one way, you like another way, but very quickly we can resolve it a way that we're both comfortable with, so we have a pattern of communication, a channel of communication in place for our interactions. We can do things like have discussions about, I'm somebody that's more of a procrastinator versus I'm somebody that really likes to get things done. Well, if we have those two different work mentalities, we need to recognize that up front, that's some storming, but it's going to allow us to realize how we are going to push each other, motivate each other, so that we can utilize both our capacities in order to reach outcomes that we want. We can have discussions about, I would like to take this role. What roles would you like to take? This seems interesting to me. Can I work on this part? We have those discussions openly, we have them quickly so that we can kind of determine the roles and we can get to that norming stage and move forward. So what we can do is use some of this information to think about how we can make our own teams more productive. Remember that left to their own devices, teams will have a tendency to procrastinate a little bit. High-performing teams spend some time planning, they spend some time doing, they spend some time engaging in quality control. High-performing teams have some tough discussions at the front end. We want to engage a little bit of storming so that we can all make sure that we're on the same page as far as how we're going to get work done.